Welcome to a special programme on the missing flight MH370.
Flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
Malaysia's Prime Minister delivers the news that the families of the 239 passengers and crew on board had been dreading. The breakthrough came as a result of unprecedented analysis by a British satellite company. We'll be there live. And as the search for MH370 enters a new phase, we'll have the latest from Kuala Lumpur, Beijing and from Perth in Western Australia.
Plus, I'll be joined by search, satellite and maritime experts for in-depth analysis of the challenges facing the investigation as it moves from rescue to recovery. That's from 7:30.
Well, tonight on Sky News, the biggest development so far in the investigation into what may have happened to missing flight MH370. The Malaysian Prime Minister confirmed that it did come down in the southern Indian Ocean. That announcement came after an unprecedented analysis of satellite data by a British company. Shortly after, relatives of those on board were told the plane had been lost. No one had survived. Our first report tonight comes from Alex Rossi in Kuala Lumpur. It contains flash photography.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, the Honourable Prime Minister of Malaysia.
The choreography suggested the news would be bad, and it was. The Malaysian Prime Minister had called this unscheduled press conference late at night. He announced that based on new calculations from satellite data, MH370 was lost beyond doubt, and all its 239 passengers and crew were no longer alive.
I was briefed by representatives from the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, or AAIB. They informed me that Inmarsat, the UK company that provided the satellite data, which indicated the northern and southern corridors, has been performing further calculations on the data. Using a type of analysis never before used in an investigation of this sort, they have been able to shed more light on MH370's flight path. Based on their new analysis, Inmarsat and the AAIB have concluded that MH370 flew along the southern corridor and that its last position was in the middle of the Indian Ocean, west of Perth. This is a remote location, far from any possible landing sites. It is therefore with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that according to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
The search will now intensify in the place where the plane went down. The British satellite company Inmarsat says the new analysis of its data is conclusive. Computer triangulation of the electronic pings, automated signals sent by the aircraft show the Boeing 777 crashed in the southern Indian Ocean.
We have worked these numbers from our data as hard as we possibly can. We can give you a likely area of the Southern Ocean, but we can't, because this plane wasn't tracked, we can't tell you exactly where to look. That will be for the ships at sea, the aircraft in the air, and obviously the spy satellites that have been trying to contribute as well.
Searching such isolated waters, though, is demanding work. But this Australian flight crew may have made a breakthrough in finding pieces of the aircraft or its cargo. They're dropping flares where they've sighted debris to help guide naval vessels.
We're looking for debris in the water, and we've sighted a number of objects, both on the surface and beneath the surface. First object was rectangular in shape, slightly below the ocean. Second object was circular, also slightly below the ocean. We came across a long, or a cylindrical object that was probably maybe 2 metres, or possibly 2 metres long, about 30 centimetres across. We came across another piece of, or another item in the area that was also cylindrical and shaped in a rough fishhook.
The Australian naval ship Success is now steaming towards the site to retrieve the objects. It's the only way investigators can know for sure whether it's significant or just maritime rubbish drifting in the ocean currents.
The ship's company are acutely aware that there are families of 239 people who are on board that aircraft, and we see it as our role to do whatever we can to provide them the answers that they deserve.
With so many military assets in the area, there's a real sense they're close to uncovering some of the wreckage from the flight. The search area now covers around 26,000 square miles. It's just over 1,500 miles southwest of Perth. Australian aircraft spotted up to 4 floating objects within the search area. Earlier today, Chinese search aircraft reported a sighting of other suspicious objects. 2 relatively big white and square items. They were dispersed amongst several smaller ones. But an American Navy search plane has been unable to relocate them. At first lights then, these aircraft will be back out, but the search for the wreckage could take years. And at the moment there are still more questions than answers. Until the black box or flight data recorder is recovered, the mystery remains as to why flight MH370 went miles off course and crashed into the ocean. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Kuala Lumpur.
Well, Alex then updated us with the latest from Kuala Lumpur.
A dramatic day here. I suppose in many ways, Mark, this was the surprise that everybody was kind of expecting. How could this flight have disappeared for so long and still the people on board, the passengers and the crew still being okay? But quite clearly the Malaysian authorities have been on the back foot. They've struggled with this operation, the scale of it, since the very beginning, not realising, of course, that the plane tracked back, banking west across the Malaysian peninsula. They picked it up on their own military radar, but they didn't realise that for 7 days, looking in the wrong place all of that time, squandering an opportunity to find the plane very early on. It's been other organisations, other countries that have really led this from the start. The British company in Masat, and now in the search corridor in the southern part of the South Indian Ocean, the Australians. A huge multinational operation is now going on down there. The military assets, the naval vessels that were currently searching in the northern corridor are now being diverted to the south. They will arrive in the next few days, possibly a week or so. And then the real nitty-gritty bit, the really difficult task of recovering the rest of the wreckage. And as you heard in my report, the flight data recorder, the black boxes. Until they find those, until they can lay their hands on them, they won't solve the mystery of what happened to this flight.
But this was the news that many relatives of the passengers on board had dreaded. Sky's Jonathan Samuels is with some of them in Beijing, as they were told. His report does include some pictures of distressed family members.
More than 2 weeks of hoping have ended just how they feared. Some react with bewilderment. Others can barely stand in their anguish. All are struggling. As they left the hotel's ballroom after the statement, a stream of grieving faces became a deluge of despair. Supported by loved ones, this woman screams that she's lost 3 members of her family: her son, his wife, and her grandson. "I beg you, it can't be like this," she cries. "That's the end of my family line." 3 generations are gone. I beg you to bring them back. The news that their relatives on the flight will never return meant some collapsed and had to be taken to hospital. For others, their pain turned to anger.
For nearly 2.5 weeks, the families have gathered in this hotel. Every day they hoped for a positive result, but it wasn't to be.
This TV reporter read the text many relatives had received. Malaysia Airlines deeply regrets that we have to assume beyond any reasonable doubt MH370 has been lost, it said. Many may now fly to Australia to be a little closer to the centre of their grief. They know their loved ones won't come back. Now they ask why and how.
Well, let's go live now to Perth, the base for the Air and Sea searchers, to speak to Simon Buddha from 9 News. Simon, how does this now affect those search operations? Because clearly they've still got to recover some kind of physical evidence, debris, from the surface of the sea itself.
Well, that's right, Mark. They've got to get that evidence. They've got to prove that wreckage that has been spotted, if it is in fact from the MH370, is part of what they're looking for. Now, those 2 items that were mentioned in that article, the grey or green circular item, the orange rectangular item, if they can be recovered and examined and found to be from the MH370, well, that'll be the evidence, and I'm sure families and relatives want to hear. They want to have proof that this plane has in fact crashed. Now, HMAS Success, as you said, is steaming into that region. The coordinates of that discovery was relayed from the P3 Orion back to the Rescue Coordination Centre. HMAS Success has those coordinates. They will be getting there. They've either got there overnight or they'll be getting there at first light this morning to try and recover those items. But I think, if anything, this will intensify the search in the southern Indian Ocean. In fact, there's a US black box detector on its way from America, which will help with that. But I guess the key to this is how far, if those bits of debris are from the MH370, how far they've drifted. I guess that's got to be backtracked. The currents have got to be backtracked. It's 17 days since the plane disappeared. They could have travelled hundreds of kilometres from the crash site in that time if they are from that plane. So there's a lot of work to be done yet before they find the precise location of where the MH370 went into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, clearly that the concentration now on the marine efforts, if you like, perhaps underwater, oceanographic, effectively an undersea search. What sort of kit does Australia have that could help in that particular part of the investigation?
I think the equipment that the Navy has is very capable of the job ahead of it, although I'm sure this is an international effort. There are vessels from all over the world, Chinese vessels steaming into the region. Malaysian Navy will also be coming into this region. So I'm sure that they'll be throwing everything they can at trying to locate that black box and try and get some idea of exactly what happened. And that's why the American black box detector is such an important tool to be coming out of the States, because that will obviously help in that effort. But as I said earlier, they've got to find where the plane went in, and that's all to do with the currents. Oceanographers know the southern Indian Ocean is a perilous bit of ocean, and the currents run so fast through there. With wind, they could travel, pieces could travel hundreds of kilometres a day. So they could be right off the mark. If they're looking at an area 2,500 kilometres from southwest from Perth, it may be off the coast of Western Australia, and that's further away again. So at this point in time, they're still looking for a needle in a haystack, but at least now they've got the clues. They've got that data, that satellite data that tracked it all the way into the Indian Ocean and the southern Indian Ocean, and they now have, hopefully, some debris from the plane. And if that is in fact from the plane, using that information, using the data from the satellite, they'll be hopefully able to pinpoint the crash site.
Simon, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, that news that the plane did indeed come down in the ocean, the most significant development in the investigation so far. As Simon was explaining, the focus now on identifying the precise location where it may have crashed and working out how it got there. David Bowden looks now at the direction the investigation will take now.
So, how did Inmarsat manage to determine beyond doubt that Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 crashed into a remote part of the southern Indian Ocean, where engineers analysed the minimal satellite data they had from the so-called electronic handshakes, the pings coming from the plane. Then they compared the shape and frequency of the signals it generated, the Doppler effect, to lots of other flights whose speed, direction and altitude were already known. And by matching the two sets of data, they've been able to say where the Malaysian airliner ended up more closely. Now, you may remember that Inmarsat was able to pick up that last electronic handshake at 8:11 a.m. And if we look at the plane's original flight path from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, then we know how much fuel was on board and how far the plane could have flown. Putting all of this information together, the search focused sharply on the area of the southern Indian Ocean. In parts of the ocean is more than 8,000 metres deep, around 26,000 feet, though in the area we now think the plane went down, it's about 3,500 metres deep. That's 11,500 feet. The currents in this region make it likely that any debris will have drifted in different directions. Now, the black box flight recorder could be thousands of feet down and anywhere in a huge area, and the debris could have drifted up to 24 miles a day. That's 168 miles in a week. A Pinger locator system has been flown in from the United States to begin searching for the flight data recorders, but time is against them.
Considering that it's going to take a couple of days to get that onto a ship in Perth, Australia, and probably about at least 5 days to get it out to the site, we have less than a handful of days before the nominal battery runs out. So the only real chance is if this Inmarsat information, which has just been announced by the Malaysian Prime Minister, can be precise enough, in addition to all the other clues, to come up with a really, really tight search box.
Well, today's crucial breakthrough in the investigation came as a result of pioneering work by a British satellite company. It performed unprecedented analysis of satellite signals to provide the confirmation that the flight had come down in the Indian Ocean. And we're joined now from the company's headquarters in the city by spokesman Chris McLaughlin. Chris, thanks very much indeed for joining us. As we've seen, it appears to be similar to a sort of sonar signal you get underwater, the ping returning from the hull of a submarine, for instance. You've done that with the flight path of the plane in the sky.
Yes, you're right. And what we were doing was looking at the once-an-hour pings between the classic aero terminal built onto the aircraft and the network. So the network was looking to see if service was required, and after the last ACARS information came off the aircraft on Saturday the 8th, the only information to come off the aircraft has been that ping. Sadly, there was no position data because it's not mandated in that region, and therefore it's been a bit of a whodunit to try to find out where that aircraft has gone.
And how difficult has it been for you to actually get a definitive answer, to go to the Malaysian authorities and actually say, this is what's happened?
Clearly, we have only been able to make a contribution rather than the definitive answer. This has never been done before. We were just using a single third-generation Inmarsat satellite over the Indian Ocean, and we were trying to use Doppler effect, as you said earlier, Doppler effect technology calculations to see whether the aircraft was moving, and if so, whether we could deduce which direction. Subsequently, what we've been doing over the last 6 days or so is looking at previous Malaysian 777 flights to build a picture of how it interacted with the satellite in its position over the Indian Ocean. And what we discovered was that the southern projected route corresponds heavily with the pings that we got off the aircraft. The northern route doesn't, and therefore yesterday we advised the air crash investigation that we believed the southern route was the right way. That was following a peer review of people in the UK space industry who looked at our technology and our calculations, and indeed working closely with Boeing, who gave us information on how the aircraft would most likely have been flying. It's been a joint effort, but yeah, I should acknowledge the work of our Inmarsat scientists.
And crucially, all this data suggests that the plane was flying, straight and level, i.e. it was under some kind of control.
Well, the assumption, and it's only an assumption, is that the aircraft headed south under autopilot at approximately 450 knots, which is the autopilot speed. We cannot know what happened in the last hour after the last ping. There's just no reported data. We can't know if it speeded up, dropped in speed. We can't know at what point it ran out of fuel, but we can know that last hour direction of travel.
So, crucially for this continuing air and sea search now, we don't know whether it would have hit the water intact or whether it may have broken up mid-air, because clearly that will be a huge difference for the debris field to be examined.
Yes, obviously that's not an area that Inmarsat has expertise in. I think it's more for Boeing to consider what happens if a plane is on autopilot and runs out of fuel. Does it plunge or does it glide? Obviously we at Inmarsat are not equipped to speculate on that one.
Well, Chris, thank you very much indeed for your expert opinion anyway. Thanks for joining us here on Sky News tonight. And just to remind you that there's more in our special report on the search so far, and all of today's dramatic developments coming up later at 8:30, again here on Sky News. And also much more on Sky News for iPad, with the latest images from the air search here for MH370, the latest maps and background to the story itself. You can use that app for free if you're a Sky TV customer. Well, there's some very public scenes of anguish in Beijing today as the relatives of those on board the missing flight were told finally that their loved ones would not be coming back. It's an emotion that will be recognised by John Clements, who lost his brother Brad in the Air France flight 447 in June 2009. He joins us now in the studio. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this occasion. Clearly they've gone through the ringer emotionally, not knowing what had happened, getting misinformation, hopes dashed, and now finally the confirmation. How on earth do people try to assimilate all that?
Well, it's extremely difficult, of course. This is going to be a terrible blow to the families. There'll be a number of them that had been holding out hope that there was still a chance that their loved ones would be alive, and that hope has now been dashed. And I think what the families need to do now is to isolate themselves and have a bit of grieving in sort of private and peacefully.
Has that been an additional difficulty, that so much of this has been played out in the public arena before the cameras?
Yes, absolutely. It's the Malaysian authorities don't seem to have coordinated their effort very well. It's been essential for them to gain the confidence of the families and to be very organized and transparent in giving out the information. That doesn't seem to be the case. They've lost the confidence of the families. The information's been given out sort of any old way by different people and different authorities, and I think that's just really augmented the difficulties for the families.
Yeah, I mean, very difficult scenes here at the hotel in Beijing where they were finally given the news. It does appear that with all the issues of hunger strikes being planned and so on, that they'd lost confidence in those in authority who were giving them the information.
Absolutely, and that was an essential step that the Malaysian authorities had to do, was to make sure they gained the confidence of the families. This is going to be a long and difficult search with a lot of sort of unknowns and very difficult circumstances that are going to unroll. And it was essential for them to have a good relationship with the families, or as good as can be expected under the circumstances.
You had to wait, some 2 years really for final confirmation. What happens in that time? And do you actually clutch at any straws? Do you wait until you get official information?